welcome back to the Peaceful Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Jamie, and this week joining me is animal activist Joanne Lee. Joanne has been vegan for 4 years and started her activism journey in January 2017. In September 2017, she co-founded DXC Melbourne, and 3 months later led a team into a daylight slaughterhouse shutdown and rescue, where 7 lives were liberated. She was part of the infamous Melbourne Steakhouse Disruption, which received global media attention, and she appeared on the project in 3AW. Her activism focuses on civil disobedience, including disruptions, shutdowns, and open rescue. With the disbandment of DXC Melbourne mid-last year, Joanne has begun collaborating with like-minded activists focusing on large-scale actions, most recently leaked.com.au and Meet the Victims. Outside of activism, Joanne is a human resources professional. The skills she has acquired through her corporate experience have had a significant influence in the way she contributes to the vegan activist community. Her passion is inspiring vegans to get active, and she does this through activist training, monthly mentoring, circles, and a weekly Instagram live series. Well, first of all, thank you for joining me on my podcast. I really appreciate it. I do believe this isn't your first time to Perth.
No. So I used to travel quite a bit for my last job. So I've been outside of Australia to New Zealand, all around Australia, but most of the time I spend my time in meeting rooms or hotel rooms. So this is the first time I've been to Perth and actually been able to walk around and explore. So it's been nice.
Oh, cool. And what's your experience been like so far?
It's pretty relaxed, which is definitely different to Melbourne, although I live in the Dandenong, so it's pretty chilled out up there. But, everyone's just really friendly and the weather's quite balmy right now, so it's nice.
That's good.
Yeah.
And is it your first time here for activism?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I haven't done a whole heap of activism around Australia. I mean, I've been to Queensland for some actions up there, and I've been to America for a conference last year, but, I haven't really done too much travelling for activism.
Fair enough. And where are you originally from?
So I was born and raised in Victoria, so Victorian all my life, and I grew up in a place called Dandenong. So for people who are from Victoria will know that and think, okay, that explains a bit about why she is the way she is. It's a bit of a rough area. It's extremely multicultural, which I love. One of the greatest things about Dandenong. My group of friends growing up were really mixed, it was a great experience, and I think it's definitely shaped who I am today, just in my professional life and even in the activism world. And one of the sayings is you can take the girl out of Dandenong, but you can't take Dandenong out of the girl.
We have a similar sayings over here for certain areas as well. And what would you say, because you sort of said it shaped who you are, in what way do you feel like it shaped you? Like what is it that's different about that part of Victoria, Australia, that would shape you in a different way?
I think it's probably just given me a bit of an appreciation and understanding of different cultures. My best friend, she's Serbian. A lot of my friends were Turkish, Albanian, from Afghanistan. So they, most of them were Muslim. A large Asian population, sort of in the Springvale area as well. So I guess it just really exposed me to a lot of different cultures, different ways of living, and my mum was also the mayor of Dandenong as well. So
wow, okay.
That was, she took us to lots of different cultural festivals, so it was great in that way. I think as well, being a bit more of a rougher area, I was pretty street smart, so I grew up around lots of people. I've had people who have been lost to drug addiction and overdoses and whatnot. So I guess I had quite a grounded upbringing and a really solid home life, but I could also see others who didn't have that experience, and I was exposed to some of the things that I guess have just given me a realistic view on life.
Maybe a bit more appreciation for your upbringing as well.
Oh, absolutely. As I've gotten older, I've realised how lucky I am to have the parents and the family that I do. They were just amazing to me, so I wouldn't be where I am without them.
Well, shout out to the parents. And what did your father do for a living?
So my dad grew up in country Victoria in Gippsland, and growing up as a young boy, they bred sheep. So I'm not sure if they use them for their hair or their flesh, but they had sheep. My dad's side of the family is from Gippsland, and my uncle also ran a farm, a small dairy, and also bred cows for their flesh as well. Okay. So he was very much from the country, moved into Dandenong and met my mum. They got married and sort of stayed down here. So
was he a sheep farmer?
No, he wasn't. He did technical school, so he's a qualified plumber and did plumbing his whole life.
Right.
He grew up, his family were quite poor,
right.
So he kind of wanted to, I guess, change that for himself, and he started up his own plumbing business. And you know, at the start, I think they struggled a little bit, but you know, he did quite well, and he really looked after the family. So,
and so you grew up around a lot of farming, a lot of animals. Did you get exposed to that at all?
Not really. I mean, when I went back to Gippsland to visit the family down there, they had animals there, did some horse riding. I would go out shooting as well with my dad, so he has guns. I actually just let my gun license lapse just recently. So, was definitely exposed to that way of life, but I had never really lived that way of life. In Dandenong, it's quite a suburban area, but, you know, we did have a sheep at one time and had a couple of goats, you know, to keep the grass down, as a lot of people do. So had a little bit of experience with animals, but not a great deal. Always had family dogs in the home and whatnot too. So
okay, fair enough. And you've also got companion animals at home. I'm probably going to mix all their names, but you've got Diesel and Zoey, Tess are the dogs, and then you've got two sheep that you live with as well, which is Alice
and Zoey. Yeah.
And so how old are the dogs?
So Diesel, he is 11 and he's an English bulldog, so very, very good age for an English bully. Yeah. And he's been plant-based for 2 years, which has absolutely helped his quality of life. So I rescued Diesel 9 years ago before I was vegan from a backyard and convinced his owner to surrender Diesel to me. And the reason I use the word owner is because that's basically how he saw his relationship with Diesel. Bought him for $5,000 as a purebred English bulldog and just left him in the backyard to rot once the novelty wore off. So rescued him, and then I rescued a greyhound again before I went vegan, my first greyhound, and she lived with me for about 3.5 years. She was quite old, and then when she passed away, Tess came along. So, and Tess has been plant-based for 2 years as well, ever since I got her. So,
when did you hear about dogs being plant-based? How did you hear about that?
I guess after going vegan myself, because I've been vegan 5 years this year, I never really considered whether or not other animals could be vegan if we were predominantly feeding them flesh-based food, because that's what my family fed the dogs in our home. But there was some information about one of the oldest living dogs being plant-based, and a lot of other dogs who were on plant-based diets that were doing really, really well. And so I guess I just researched it. I didn't want to put them at risk, but I also don't believe that their lives are worth any more than the hundreds of animals that it would take to feed them. And so after investigating it and sourcing some dry food that had all of the same nutritional values as their flesh-based food, I thought, let's give it a go. And 2 years on, they're both doing amazingly. I actually had a failed attempt with the first greyhound and Diesel. She lost quite a bit of weight. I didn't transition them slowly enough, so I learnt some lessons there. And then when Tess came along, tried it again, and it's amazing. Even my non-vegan family, my dad, who feels sorry for the dogs because they're not eating flesh, has also conceded that they're doing very well on the diet. So,
have you had them checked up by veterinarians?
Absolutely,
or anything like that?
Yeah. So they get their annual vaccinations. Both of them had blood tests recently for different reasons. I just wanted to check in and see how they were going. And both of them, including Diesel, who's an 11-year-old bulldog, and their life expectancies are, I think, 8 to 10 years old. Both of their blood bloods are amazing. So
right. And it's interesting because you get the same thing when you become vegan as a human. Obviously, people start worrying about your nutrition and where you're getting where you're getting the vitamins and minerals. But then before that, you're eating all these junk foods and nobody's really questioning it. And with dog food, I mean, the more you look into it, you know, I've even heard stories about them using cardboard as fillers, and the animal flesh is considered, it's not human grade, so they can't even sell it on the shelves. So I guess when you think about it in that way, it's not just only feeding them the animal flesh, it's actually also what would be in that. That's right, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that something you thought about when?
Oh, I think one of the things that stood out to me was I was at a vigil in my early days when I started activism, and I saw a skip bin with pet food written on the side, and a forklift was moving that bin, and they hit a bump and intestines and a whole heap of crap just fell out of it. And I thought, oh my God, like that's what actually goes into that food.
And you don't really think about it much, do you? When you go to the supermarket, you just see it in the bags and the tins
exactly.
and that kind of thing. Oh, that's great that they're doing well.
Yeah.
And the 2 sheep that you've got.
Yes.
How long have you had them for?
I've had them since November last year, so it's been a few months. And Zoey and Alice have got very different stories, but they're inseparable now. So Alice was rescued by my amazing friend Cara, who found Alice paralysed on the side of the road. We think that she'd been left out for the knackery truck to pick up. She'd been tethered to a fence. She couldn't move her back legs. And so Alice is a merino cross. So she was being used for her hair. And she would have been bred. She had large udders at the time, and she was just completely exhausted. And, you know, in that situation, she would just be killed and, discarded. So Cara popped Alice in the back of her car and over a period of a few months rehabilitated her, got her a wheelchair, was giving her daily shots, and Alice is now running around happy and healthy, and she's just amazing. And then Zoey, who she's found friendship with and who she's completely obsessed with, was actually liberated as part of the leaked.com.au action. So that was, I think, I can't remember when leaked was this.
August 2018 I've got here.
There you go. So we had about 10 activists occupying the roof at that action, and they were still killing the animals while the protest was taking place. So about 25 to 30 people decided to occupy the holding pens just so there was more of a presence, and they stopped killing animals at that time. And in exchange for people getting down off the roof, they handed Zoey over. So she was picked out of about 100 or so others, and again lived with Cara. Cara built a trust, you know, with her, and just to let her know that human hands weren't going to hurt her anymore. And it just kind of happened that they ended up coming to stay with me, and that's it. That's where they live now.
Oh, that's great. That's really good. And I'm really, we'll touch on those different actions as well, but I'm really interested to find out how you became vegan, because your upbringing and, from what I understand, your family aren't vegan. So how did you find out about veganism or find your way to becoming vegan?
I think mine kind of happened in a backwards way, because a lot of people watch, you know, Earthlings or something like that, and there's this moment where they're like, oh my God, I need to go vegan, and they've got all the information and then they do it. Whereas I was brought up by my parents to treat people with respect, treat people how I wanted to be treated. Obviously, they didn't extend that to other species. So it was a very speciesist upbringing, and animals were here for us to use. Dogs were here to be our companions. And I also avoid using the term companion animals, because it kind of indicates that they're here to be our companions, whereas animals may not.
Them? What would you?
Just the dogs, or Tess and Diesel, or the animals that live with me.
Okay, because I'm really trying to change my language, because that's something that I wanted to ask you about, because you have put a lot of emphasis on the use of language surrounding animals. And did you want to touch a little bit on why that's important around when you become vegan?
Yeah, I think it's important because we, you know, when we use industry terms like ham or beef, that basically just takes away from what that actually is. It is cow flesh or it is pig's flesh. And it just, I think language kind of became really important. I understood the importance of it when I went to a cafe with a non-vegan colleague and we were ordering coffees, and I asked for soy milk and he also ordered a coffee, and she said, do you want plant milk or are you after cow's milk? And it was the first time I'd heard anyone say cow's milk, and I saw his reaction. He kind of, stepped back and said, normal milk. And she said, so cow's milk? And he's like, yeah. And I just noticed how uncomfortable it made him because he wasn't thinking that it had come from a cow. And so that kind of demonstrated to me the importance of it. And, I just started changing my language, and it's not done in an effort to shock people. It's just being realistic about it, about what those products of violence actually are. And I think when it comes to how we refer to other animals, we can either perpetuate speciesism, inadvertently with our language by saying, I'm the dog's owner, or they're my dogs, and we perpetuate that notion that animals can be owned. Or we can actually liberate our language and start referring to them as individuals. You can call them your housemates or the dogs that live with me, or just by their names, And if people don't know who Tess or Diesel are, I'll just say, they're the dogs that live with me. And then when I say Tess or Diesel, they know. And look, we're not perfect, and I might slip up from time to time, but I think language is a very powerful tool, so we just need to use it, wisely.
No, I agree. Isn't there a book that you read as well that...
Yes, it's called Language and Liberation. I forget who the author is, but there's a great kind of glossary at the back of the book, and it provides alternative terms. So instead of saying, slaughterhouse, you can say killing factory, because that's actually what it is. Slaughterhouse, we're desensitized to that term, and it just... people are used to hearing that. Abattoir you wouldn't even, know what that actually means. So saying killing factory, or, the place where the animals are killed, saying dairy cow is perpetuating the notion that cows are here to produce dairy. So it's cows who are exploited for their milk, and it's not dairy, it's cow's milk. It's cheese made from cow's milk. And it might take a bit more effort and energy to start explaining those words further, like instead of saying I don't eat meat, I don't consume animals, or I don't eat animal flesh, but it just changes the meaning altogether, and it makes people think.
I agree completely. And so getting back to your vegan journey as well.
Yes.
So keep me along the journey.
Yes, so I went off track there.
I took you off track. We'll come back though.
So I was brought up in a very speciesist household. I didn't have a massive connection to animals. I loved cats when I was growing up, and then sort of moved towards more so dogs. But I've very much been about sort of justice and respect and, and those sorts of things. I'm working in the HR field as well. I've become more and more passionate about equality. And so I was becoming a bit more conscious of the impact of my choices. I was buying free range, grass-fed, organic, blah, 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 all of those taglines to make you feel like you're making an ethical choice. And I think it was over a period of time I was just seeing things that weren't quite adding up. And I recall seeing footage of a free-range egg farm, and I thought, hang on, that's not... So I'm funding that. That's what I'm paying for. And I actually got quite pissed off about it and thought, they're lying to me, they're taking my money, and this is what I'm actually supporting when I thought I was supporting something else. So I decided to go vegan overnight, on the spot, purely for welfarist reasons, because I thought if I can't guarantee they've been treated humanely, then I don't want to support it. Obviously, it was only a short leap after I'd already gone vegan to say, okay, there's actually no humane way to do the wrong thing to somebody. I wouldn't want someone doing that to me, whether I was being treated really well. In the end, they all die. And so it's just not morally okay to do that. So then I started researching and finding out about hatcheries and the grinding of male chicks and, the documentaries. And I watched all of that after I'd already gone vegan. So it's a little bit, it came about in a really weird way. But really for me, I felt like I'd been lied to, and it just pissed me off. And I thought, I'm not going to support you with my money, because I think the biggest vote that we have is with every dollar that we spend. And I didn't want to be giving my money to, to organisations like that.
That makes sense.
And then from there, I started to really understand anti-speciesism and, you know, the fact that this is not a food issue. It's about how we view animals. And, you know, there's so many different facets to animal liberation, and animals who are used for food is a large part, but it's just one part of the overall fight. And so, in the 5 years, my knowledge, understanding and appreciation for other animals and what they're going through has absolutely deepened and strengthened as well. So,
And the more you find out, obviously, there's a sense of urgency, isn't there? Because
Absolutely.
you find out that how many numbers of animals are being killed, and not just the numbers, but also that it's across the board, you know, with most species, even with dogs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you know, when we talk about our language and the messages we put out there, you know, there's these sayings like, why love one and eat the other? Well, people might not love dogs. So does that then justify them eating other animals? No, it's just about respect. It's, you know, you don't have to love animals. You don't have to think they're cute. I don't think snakes are cute, but I'm not going to, you know, kill them for my own purposes. We really have to get it back down to the fundamental of everyone is here equally, and we're not designed equally. We don't have equal needs. But we're equal in all the ways that matter, which is we all want to live a life that's pleasant, that's free from harm, free from exploitation, and so we just need to extend that to others. And we overcomplicate it, and it's really just as simple as that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because I think the whole, well, do you love animals? I've heard that a lot during outreach, and I'm sure I've made that mistake myself. And you might get some people that,
don't really care
not
about
really.
it.
And we also hear stories of activists and people that are heavily involved in animal rights that will say clearly that they didn't really care too much about animals.
Yep.
So I guess it is really just about understanding the values and morals that you've got. Why would you not extend those to these other beings? And so do you want to also touch on what speciesism is, because that's quite a fundamental part of some of the activism you're involved in, right?
Yeah, so speciesism, put quite simply, is just discrimination towards others based on their species membership. That's really what it is. It's just another form of discrimination. We're taught it at a very young age because we say, well, these animals are for eating, these ones you can let in your home, but these ones we can force them to race, and that's okay. It's very confusing, and I think we just bamboozle people and overcomplicate things to the point where when we find out what's going on, we're kind of like, oh, well, everyone's kind of doing it. We need to do it. There comes the propaganda, particularly around, you know, food issues from those industries. They get into the schools nice and early. So it is very confusing. And when you're confronted with that, you've kind of got a few different options. One is you think, right, that's messed up. I don't want to contribute to that. I'm going to make a change. Another one is just complete denial, you know, and just, I guess, turn away from the issue. And then there are other people, I think, that kind of, make small changes or try and do the right thing, but maybe eventually they need to pick a side. You can't be neutral.
That's right. And so you've become vegan, and all of a sudden you're researching and you're learning more about it. And then at some point you decide that you're going to become active in helping animals. How did that come about?
I think I was vegan for a couple of years, and I realized that wasn't enough, because I was, you know, sharing food, posting recipes, posting stuff online, and I just felt like, I wasn't doing enough. So decided to, just see what activism was all about. I went to an induction with Animal Liberation Victoria, and they talked about abolition. They showed us footage of what was happening to animals in, the places where they were being kept and bred and raised for food. And it was very confronting. And I remember having a moment when I was sitting in there thinking, this is a bit extreme, like this abolitionist stuff that they're talking about. But I thought it makes sense, but it's just so full on. And so
do you mean what was extreme? Which part of it?
Oh, I'd just never been in a room. It was the first time I'd been in a room with vegans, and they were showing intense footage, and they were talking about what they were doing, you know, breaking the law and trying to stop what was happening and get the message out there. And it's just full on. So, growing up, even though I grew up in Dandenong and people may have assumed that meant that I was, in trouble with the law, I've never had any issues with the law. I do the speed limit, I pay my fines, I'm a law-abiding person. And so being in a room with Patty Mark, who is, an absolute pioneer, saying, and, you will likely be arrested, and I've spent, a little bit of time in jail, but it's fine. And I'm just looking at this sweet, little old lady saying that she, break the law and you may go to jail. And it's confronting.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you think that as well, there is obviously a bias in the media, and we're taught that activism is quote unquote extreme and militant and these kind of things. Do you think there was a bit of bias in there at all?
Definitely. It is confronting, but I guess I continued on the path, so I knew that it was the right thing to do. And I think it's important to be honest with activists. It's not, I think sometimes, we only see snippets on social media, and, just before this I was showing you some footage of what's happening right now with, winter lambing, and it's not glamorous and it's not fun. And, I think people assume that activists are just troublemakers that want to break the law, but it's crap. I mean, you've got people who don't understand you. You can feel isolated at times. And at the moment what we're seeing is farmers are targeting activists and they want their addresses, and they're, it's not pleasant, but it's necessary. And so I can understand why the media wants to paint this as extreme, and it's convenient because once you admit that a group of people are representative of a majority or part of the mainstream, well, then that means that it's a legitimate issue. And so as long as you can paint activists as marginalised, minorities, extremists, well then, that's the way that will remain. But it's getting harder and harder to, I guess, perpetuate that. But a classic example was the Dominion March in Melbourne had 3,000 people, and there was bugger all media coverage of it. Yet the next day, 100 of us went into Maya and disrupted the cosmetics department, and it went viral online because they don't want us to be seen as a proportion of society.
When we say they, I'm really curious, like, different people might have different viewpoints on this, but who do you feel like they are? Like, who is it that doesn't, is it sort of just a collective idea that we hold as a society, or do you feel like there's, I guess, moguls in these businesses that have vested interest in media companies, and like, what do you think?
When I say they, I mean anyone who benefits from the oppression of animals. So politicians, I mean, there's such a conflict of interest in politics. A lot of them are from agricultural backgrounds, and many of them have got vested interest in the industry continuing. They being, anyone who makes money from or takes pleasure in and knowingly understands what happens to other animals, are who I consider they. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because also I've heard as well that the media, I'll see if I can phrase it correctly. The media, obviously they want to create conflict because that's what gets clicks, but they also want to perpetuate the norm because that's what's going to appeal to the largest majority of people. So if the majority were vegan, then they might be painting, the non-vegans as being the extreme group. Do you have any ideas on that as well? Does that fit into your narrative at all?
Yeah, I think the media just want to go with what's going to get the attention, what's going to sell papers and get clicks, absolutely. But again, there are people who work in the media who have been in the media a long time, and again, a lot of them are involved with various industries and they have different alliances. And I think it was Jim Morrison from The Doors said, whoever controls the media controls the mind. I don't know if I've quoted him correctly.
Oh, that's good though.
Hopefully I like that. Have. But, it is absolutely true. And I I don't watch TV except for some trashy shows to get the drama feel. But I don't read newspapers. I don't buy into the crap that I read online. And I think veganism and particularly activism has taught me to challenge anything and everything that I've ever been told as fact, because I've found more often than not that it's bullshit. So
There's an agenda.
Absolutely.
That's right. Your first action, what was the first action you were involved in?
Yeah, so I went to the Animal Liberation Victoria induction, and then my first action was a 16-hour vigil across 3 different slaughterhouses. And so we had about 80 activists there for a whole 16 hours. It was a really hot day in January in 2017. And the Riot Squad turned up, and ALV had a pretty bad reputation at that time. They were seen as the extreme direct action group. At that time, they were really the only group that were kind of doing those sorts of things. And the Riot Squad turned up, and it was a baptism of fire. I saw animals in trucks for the first time. I saw police brutality towards activists. It was very confronting. But I saw just how strong the force was, and how important it was, activism was, because of what I could see. The head police officer was shaking hands with the slaughterhouse manager. That actually set up a camp inside the slaughterhouse. So when the trucks came, they would be out, and when there was a break, they'd go back into the killing factory. And I thought, police is supposed to be impartial and unbiased. And I actually found, it's not confirmed, but I researched this, and you can actually pay for police presence. And so I believe the slaughterhouse actually paid for public servants to be there that day. And when somebody does that and you're paying their bill, they're absolutely going to be on the side of the oppressors more than ever.
Protecting big business.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so from there, when did you start deciding you were going to organise?
So I was attending, after the ALV 16-hour vigil, they were raided and animals were seized from their property, and they went very quiet. It was a very sad time for them, and scary, because they'd had a couple of steers taken away from them. And so they went very, very quiet. There were a few save groups who were organising vigils, and I started attending vigils with Melbourne Chicken Save, who was being run by Lizzie at the time. And we were going to chicken killing factories, and we were trying to stop trucks and bear witness. And things began to escalate at that particular facility. The manager didn't want to cooperate, and we started taking more, I don't know how to describe it, but we were doing things to stop the trucks that potentially weren't typical of a save vigil.
So they have a particular code of conduct and the way the things are meant to be done.
Yeah, we were still non-violent at all times, but we weren't just backing down. And so they built $10,000 gates across the weighbridge, so that, because we were walking in and filming, and so we were using those gates when the trucks were coming to actually block them out and hold the gates shut. So it was a form of resistance, and it got to a point where it got too dangerous, and it wasn't, Lizzie was getting threats from that particular place as well, and she said, we just can't go there anymore. I was getting frustrated because I felt like we were just allowing animals to be taken to their death, and that's when I had a conversation with a few more experienced activists saying, like, I want to start a more disruptive group, and that's where we formed DXE Melbourne.
Okay, great. And so I believe your first action, was it shutting down a slaughterhouse?
No, so that was our first, I guess, the most intense action that we sort of did. But first off, we did a disruption at a food truck park. Right. They were having a fried chicken festival or something like that. So we had about 25 to 30 people go in there, disrupt. We did chanting, we had some signs and a megaphone, and that was our first one. From there, we disrupted a hotel where Australian Pork Limited were having their annual general meeting. We were going to actually storm the meeting room and protest inside, but we turned up and the meeting had ended. So there were still people from the organisation in the hotel, so we disrupted the hotel. And I think from there was the food court as part of the big activist weekend in Melbourne. 80 people occupied the food court in Melbourne Central, and we were there for an hour because there were 80 of us. That's when I realised the power of numbers. They couldn't move us on. They couldn't get us to leave. When the police arrived, they said, look, how much longer do you want to be here for? And so, Lizzie was liaising with them and said, look, give us another 5 minutes. We'd already been in there for an hour, and that was my first speak out. I was exhausted from just going for an hour. And so it just kind of took off from there, and then the action after that was the shutdown at Star Poultry.
Okay. All right. Interesting. And what was that experience like of going into that facility? Was that the first time that you'd been inside a slaughterhouse?
I'd been inside a slaughterhouse once before with Animal Liberation Victoria, so they did a small sort of occupation of the holding pens, but there was no killing happening. It was a Sunday, and they don't kill on a Sunday there, so we were it was just solidarity. There were animals in the pens, and we were just occupying that space. But this was the first time that I'd actually gotten inside to where animals were being prepared to be killed, I guess. And so as it was the first action, and I co-organised it, but I was the only person from the organising team that was going in. So we handpicked about 20 people. We didn't want to make it big because we'd not done anything like that before, and I didn't know. My biggest thing as an organiser is the safety of the people, and I want everyone to come out in the condition that they came in. I didn't know if the workers would have knives. I didn't know if they would be aggressive. I wanted to trust that the people that were coming in would behave in the right way as well, because I don't want a confrontation. It needs to be peaceful. So we handpicked 20 people, and we all went inside. We stood between the crates and the shackles so that they couldn't kill, and we were able to liberate 7 chickens that day. It got very messy at the end, and as an organiser, I learnt a lot from that experience. There was a bit of a scuffle with police. Unfortunately, 1 chicken was actually taken back into the kill line, and that's something that we deeply regret. But yeah, there was 7 that were able to be liberated, and yeah.
What do you feel like is the importance of liberating animals from these environments? Because obviously when you look at the numbers, people might argue, well, we're talking billions here. What do you feel like is the importance of rescuing these particular animals?
So Rocket, who was the first out, we thought he had a broken leg and he'd need to be put to sleep. But the vet said that he could recover. And so why is it important? Because they're not billions, they are in a collective, but Rocket was one individual, and his life meant the world to him. And so he deserved to come out, as they all did. And you can't save them all, but I don't see them as a collective. I see them as individuals. And if I was in Rocket's place, I'd want someone to take me out. So that's what we did.
That's right. And so we touched before the interview as well on the importance of the stories that come from these animals and them being liberated. And some of those animals have gone on to actually inspire other people. What was Tilt? Was another animal as well that you spoke about earlier.
Yes.
What was Tilt's story?
So Tilt came out of an intensive chicken farm, and we went there several weeks prior. We just wanted to document, a small team of us, just the growth and, I guess just sharing some footage. I think footage is quite powerful. That's what got me to go vegan. And I know that there's things that exist like Dominion and Earthlings, but sometimes I find that when you share your first-hand experience or small snippets, people can take the time to watch a 1-minute clip. And so we just wanted to see what impact the footage would have. So we went in and documented them at a few weeks old. And then we went back after a couple of weeks just before they were due to be killed. And we were on our way out, and Lizzie spotted Tilt suffocating in shit on the floor. He had a condition we found after that called Rhineck, where they don't get enough nutrients and it affects their growth in their body. So Tilt was taken out of there to get vet attention. Again, we thought that he'd probably be put to sleep. And we also rescued a little girl called Cricket, and unfortunately the next day she had a massive heart attack and passed away. But she was in the sun with Lizzie, and she was, she knew kindness at that time. So Tilt went on to be cared for, weekly acupuncture antibiotics, and he needs pretty special care. He's been receiving pretty special care, costs quite a bit of money, but again, it's not about just a chicken. He's Tilt, and his life means everything to him and to us. So Tilt's doing amazing now. He's probably the best he's ever been. There's been a few scares and he's had some ups and downs, but he's such a character and people have connected to his story so much. And I think it's important to share the good times and the bad times, because if you just show people despair and sadness, they might think, like what you've said, there's billions of these animals, what's the point? We can't make a difference. But Tilt's making a difference. He's advocating for animals, and I think it's a great way to allow animals to advocate for themselves rather than us being their saviours and advocating for them. We can facilitate and amplify their voices, and Tilt is doing a much better job in outreaching than any of us will ever do. He's been on the Sea Shepherd ship and got some photos and footage with the workers there, and he's just amazing.
And so you've obviously got you mentioned your history of working in HR. What importance do you feel like that has played in your activism, or how do you feel like that's influenced your activism?
It's been massive. I think if it wasn't for my corporate career, I wouldn't be maybe even doing what I'm doing. I think working in HR, obviously there needs to be a level of empathy there and concern for, equality and that kind of thing. And so I think, in the roles that I've been in, so the last position I was in was a senior executive HR person. I was on a senior management team, and I was dealing with all sorts of things from, issues with staff and their personal lives through to, having to mediate between two directors who are having a conflict, taking people down to the hospital to get stitches because they've been smacked in the eye by another worker. And, so I've seen it all, I've heard it all, I've dealt with it all, I've supported managers through terminations and through the good things as well, developing people and seeing people progress and grow. And so I think when I came into the activism world, being a very organised, structured, confident person who can, keep calm under pressure, I think it just really helped with the organisational side of things around communicating to people, showing appreciation, understanding what motivates them and drives them, and then also being able to take a leading role without abusing that power and mobilising people in the right way to get the best out of them. But in turn, for selfish reasons, it's all about getting the right result for the animals. So
interesting. And so you've also taken those leadership skills and you're teaching about leadership now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And how have you found that experience?
Yeah, I think there's a real lack of training and support provided to vegans and activists, and a lot of us come into activism, we don't receive any training and we think we're experts right away. And a lot of the time we will look to people who are seen as leaders in the movement and we will basically regurgitate or just copy what they're doing. And I think it's important that people find their own voice, uncover their own skill sets and what they can offer to activism. We don't need 100 people who are all the same. We need many different approaches. Some of them are less sexy than others. So, standing on a street corner handing out leaflets might not make great social media, but if you're out there for a full day, you could hand out 100 vegan easy booklets, and who knows how many people may actually make the connection that way. So I guess the leadership workshop that I run is about being a personal leader. So it's not necessarily being part of an organisation and being a leader. It's just about personal leadership and taking accountability for being the best we can be. And in turn, you may fall into a leadership role by demonstrating those behaviours and being that person.
Yeah, right. Is that also what led you to start your Instagram series that you started? It's called Empowering Women, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I started the Instagram series was throughout my experience as an activist, women are undoubtedly make up the majority of the movement. They do a lot of labour, in the public eye and out, and behind the scenes. They are not only organising actions, they also get involved in rescue, and they are heavily involved in the care of other animals. And I always say the rescue bit's easy. When, people who run rescues or sanctuaries give me feedback and say, you're amazing, I love what you're doing, thank you so much. It's embarrassing to me because I think, me going in somewhere for 5 minutes and taking someone out is the easy part. It's the aftercare, the emotional, financial labour of caring for these animals that I respect. And I guess, the people that I look up to in this movement are not people with big platforms, and they don't have Patreons, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but they're just not high-profile people. They're your everyday activist who's just putting absolutely all that they've got into looking after the most vulnerable and abused animals, on the earth. And so, I have a lot of respect for them.
And so how many have you done now? How many?
Rescues?
No, the interviews that you've done with the
empowered women. Sorry, yes, I got a bit off track there again. So
no, that's fine.
The reason I started that series was because women do make up the majority, and I think a lot of the time they don't necessarily get the platform or the opportunity to talk about what they're working on. I think as well women find it difficult to promote themselves. Some women are comfortable doing it, but it can feel less natural for them and a little bit awkward to talk about what they're doing. But it's so important because we need diversity. We need, if the majority of our movement are women, we need women for women to look up to as well. And so that's really what inspired me to start the series and to just talk to people that have big platforms, smaller platforms, or no platforms at all, and just to talk about what they're up to, so that people might relate to them and think, hey, I can't take part in a lockdown, but I can absolutely foster some chickens, So, that's kind of what prompted me to start the series, and for my own, again, selfish reasons, just to learn more from other people and hear about, what they're doing. So
yeah, no, that's really awesome. And so what are your future plans with that? Are you going to keep going? Have you got a certain number that you're going to try and do?
I think I've done about 15 now. I've had a little bit of a break. I've just wanted to take a step back in the last couple of months and really just think about what I'm doing and where I want to take things. So I do intend to keep going with the series, but I'm just taking a bit of a breather, and that's probably something that I avoided doing or didn't recognize the warning signs when I was working my 50 plus hour a week job, plus organising multiple actions and supporting other actions behind the scenes. I just need to take a bit of a step back and figure out where to from here.
Because I was going to ask you, because you do have a lot of your activism you share on social media and you put on Instagram. How do you find a balance between your own life, activism, but also finding time to share that? And how do you find that whole experience? It's a big part now, obviously, of getting the message out there.
It is. I think, the reality for me was I didn't have the balance right. So I was working over 50 hours a week in a stressful, I'm restructuring, helping restructure a business. I'm terminating people. I'm hiring people. I'm, supporting staff through trauma and, supporting their managers. On top of all of that, I'm organising actions. I'm dealing with other things that are happening, from an organising perspective, and supporting other activists and mentoring them. And, so it was too much. And, I have 8 nieces and nephews. We're a very close family. I've got friends, non-vegan friends as well that I, love and adore. And the balance was off. But I think that happens when you first get involved in activism. You're like, shit, this problem is dire. Like, it is so urgent. I just need to put everything I've got into it. But unfortunately, that's not sustainable, and you end up burning out. And the worst thing that can happen is that people leave and never return. So I'm learning some hard lessons now and just trying to reset. And it's hard because I have people contacting me all the time saying, hey, this, expo's coming up, or, that, whatever's happening, events happening, we should disrupt it, or we should do something. I'm like, fantastic. Yes, you organise it. Let me know if you need any resources or support, but you go ahead and do that. because I think for a long time a lot of the burden has fallen on a few shoulders, and people are happy to turn up, but they either don't want to organise or they don't know how to organise. And so that's why I started the training modules as well, to try and empower people with the knowledge and the skills to start organising themselves.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's really great. And so the HR side of things, you made a decision, I believe, to focus your energy entirely onto activism. Was that what you've done? You've moved on from that particular role at this point?
I have, yes. So I left that business at the end of last year, and I am now working part-time.
Okay.
So I work 3 days a week in a HR business partner role, so still in HR. It's great because it's still a very challenging, diverse business. It's growing very rapidly, and I'm still quite engaged, and I work with an amazing boss as well now. She's a female boss, and there's a lot more gender balance in the leadership team there, but I'm not on the leadership team, which is fantastic. So I'm really enjoying the balance, and then having more time during the week so that I can come to things, like the Perth Vegan Expo, or I can do activism on a day off, or I can switch my days around so that I do the back end of the week 3 days. The flexibility is amazing, and I've taken a pretty decent pay cut to work part-time, but for me, I'm not motivated by money, and my priorities have significantly changed as well since going vegan. I used to live to work, and now I just work to live. Just love spending time with the animals and doing other things. And
you touched on earlier about the leaked action as well, and that was quite unique in the sense that you guys actually created a website. What was the reason for taking that approach?
Yeah, so I think those sorts of things with the footage and the website have been done before. So I'll just reference a couple of them. So pigtruth.com. So the first time that footage was ever captured inside the gas chambers, and if you see any outreach footage with pigs thrashing around in gas chambers, that's come from Pig Truth.
Okay.
That was ALV. I think it may have been a combined ALV and Aussie Farms investigation, but I'm not too sure. But they launched the Pig Truth website, and then activists locked down in the gas chambers to get that out there. Eggsexposed.com.au, that was an Aussie Farms action.
Right.
First time, I believe, that footage of baby male chicks in the macerator was ever captured. They also did an action to coincide with that. So I think a bit of inspiration was drawn from them, but I think they were a few years ago, and so the environment, the climate of activism and veganism has changed, probably a bit more attention on it now. So when we did the leaked action, the website was up, very simple website with the leaked CCTV footage, and then the banner on the roof of the facility was shared, and it just went viral. And I think the reason it went viral was because we had social media influencers sharing the footage, and it really just took off. And I think a lot of the time, we say that was a powerful action, or, that was impactful. The way that I judge whether something is powerful or impactful is what non-vegans are saying, not the backslapping that happens in the vegan movement. And so I ask my non-vegan friends and family if they heard about it, what they think about it. And I had messages from people who consumed animals who were outraged at what they saw in that footage, saying, tell me where that place is and who that person is, because there was quite a violent and disturbed worker in that room, kicking the heads of sheep around, throwing knives, and people were trying to direct their anger to that worker, and they were non-vegans who ate animals. And so it was a great opportunity for me to say, hey, look, I understand that you're probably not happy about what he was doing, but understand that he's also he's being funded by the consumer. And, he's working in a violent industry, and where there is, it's violent. And so you can't expect people who work in these industries not to potentially display violent behaviours. And there is, I guess, data and studies that have been conducted about PTSD, domestic violence, and other issues resulting from people that work in these industries of violence.
So that's really interesting, because I think most people would assume that you actually had, I guess, ill feelings towards people in these industries, but from what I'm understanding, you actually have quite a bit of empathy for them.
A bit. Look, I think, I wouldn't say
More
that
understanding.
understanding. It's difficult, right? Because it is easy to get really pissed off with the person in that footage. And perhaps I'll be criticized for not being angry at him. But there's more, he is a victim of the system in a way. We're allowing him to behave in that way by creating the demand. And so how can I be angry at him? And what is being angry at him going to achieve? What is it actually going to achieve?
And if a person does want to do those things, what does that say about either their, we hear about nature versus nurture, whether it's brain chemistry or an upbringing or a traumatic thing that's happened. It's sort of more like cause and effect, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
To see where that person's ended up in that situation.
That's obviously a horrible scenario and a situation with that particular worker. But then, there was also a worker who was there on that day who actually reached out to somebody and asked about veganism. So where there's horror stories, I think there's also positive stories as well, and it's important that we focus on both. But if we channel our energy and our hate and our anger into individuals, it does not solve the problem, because there's plenty more where that person came from, and we need to stop I guess providing opportunities for those things to happen.
And what do you see as being some of the biggest threats to the movement at the moment? I've been hearing a lot about people saying that the movement itself is one of the actual biggest threats.
Yeah, the biggest threat to veganism is vegans, really. I think sometimes people assume that because somebody is vegan that they're going to be a stand-up person, but we're all humans and we're all flawed. We're not perfect. And just because someone's vegan doesn't mean that you're going to be best mates. I really try to avoid any of the drama or bullshit online, because I just think about how that energy could be channeled into actually taking action. You see these long threads on Facebook where every person's putting their 2 cents in, and I just think to myself, if you actually spent that time and energy handing out leaflets or coming up with an action, we'd be making much better progress. And we're fighting with people who are trying to achieve the same thing. Now, there is a balance to that, where I think if there is behaviour or issues that come up that are detrimental to the cause or risk the safety of other people, or will hold things back, yes, they absolutely need to be addressed. But a lot of the time it's just personality conflicts and drama, which is not helpful.
And how do you think we approach those types of situations? Because from what I can see, a lot of these things aren't being resolved online. So what are some of the things that you would suggest if someone does have an issue with something that someone's done or another person within the movement?
Well, the first thing I would ask is it actually harmful to the movement, or is it just your opinion? Because everyone has an opinion. I would have done that differently, or I didn't agree with how they did that. That's fine. Just take it on board, and when you organise your own action, just make sure that you avoid doing that. I've learnt a lot from watching other people's actions on what to do and what not to do, but I wouldn't then critique them online about it. If I felt compelled enough that it was actually an issue and it was detrimental, then I would have a direct conversation with them, and there's ways that you can do it. I think using appreciative inquiry, seeking to understand rather than accusing, and say, hey, look, I noticed this. Was my interpretation of that correct, or have I maybe understood that wrong? And it just opens up a non-defensive conversation with someone, rather than saying, you did this is why you did it, and assuming their intention. Because I think most people are well-intentioned. It's just the impact of those actions that may not be ideal. Right. But yeah, I would encourage people to have conversations. And if you're able to, bitch about someone behind their back, well, then you're obviously confident enough to talk to someone else. Just take it direct to the person,
Okay.
In a non-confrontational way.
No, I think that's really good. And so what have you got coming up? Because you were recently part of the duck hunting, the duck hunting season. Let's touch on that first. Like, what was that experience like of going into those areas where I guess people are shooting ducks. And do you want to touch a little bit about on that actual, it's an industry, I guess you'd call it a quote unquote sport, but it's not really.
I mean, there is money tied up in it because they all have to pay for a license, a game hunting license. So it does generate revenue for the government. Again, they're part of the they who want to paint vegans as extremists and minorities, because there is a lot of money tied up in all of these sorts of things. So hunters have been going out to the wetlands and shooting native birds for, as long as probably most people who are alive now can remember, and it's recreation. Some of them will claim it's conservation, but when you go to the wetlands and you see the amount of birds who have just been shot and left behind, or the shells that have just been discarded on the ground and they're clogging up the waterways, it's not conservation. So my first time I went out a couple of years ago onto the wetlands, and I'd been around guns before because my dad shoots and I used to go out hunting with him. So I wasn't really confronted by people with guns, but it can be a bit it's full on, people are shooting guns. And so the reason that we go out is to scare the birds away so that they leave the line of fire, and you do that with whistles and flags and bright colours, and also distract the shooters if possible as well. And that's not by running in their face, but it could be just having conversation with them, or distracting them in whichever way that you can. The ultimate goal is to avoid birds being shot from the sky, so that's why we're there.
So it's sabotage, essentially. Yeah, and there are groups, aren't there, that are called saboteurs?
Yeah, there are saboteur groups, but I think they focus more on land hunting, particularly foxes, and maybe deer as well. I'm not too sure. There is a Melbourne-based group that does that, and I think it originated in the UK because it's very,
like fox hunting.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite big there.
So we went out recently. Duck hunting season started a couple of weeks back, and it runs for about 3 months. We went to the first lake that we'd been to 2 years ago, and that lake, which was a massive collection of 3 or 4 lakes, was completely dry. And that was quite shocking to see, the drought and the lack of habitat for the birds. It was quite confronting to see that. We went to another lake, so that means that all of the animals congregate in other areas because there's less places to go. We didn't go out with a specific group, so there is a couple of groups, CADS, so the Coalition Against Duck Shooting, and then there's also Geelong Duck Rescue. So there's other groups that are dedicated to the season. We went out just as a group of concerned citizens and unbranded, and about 6 of us went out to a lake, and we disrupted the hunting there for a day.
And do you feel as well, because while you're saying that, I'm kind of thinking that there's a lot of species of animals that people focus on, but then there's a lot of forms of activism that people focus on, but then I'm assuming there's lots of species that get neglected and a lot of types of activism that don't get as many numbers. Did you want to touch a bit on that, maybe the importance of actually making sure that we're not just focusing solely on some species or some forms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we were talking a little bit earlier about, vegans versus farmers, and I think it's becoming this war between animal agriculture and vegans, but that's not what this is about. There's so many other forms of oppression and violence that are happening towards animals that need to be addressed. And so I have encouraged, and I continue to encourage people to diversify their activism. And so some of the things like duck hunting, I honestly think that it'll be banned in Victoria at some stage very soon in the near future. It's banned in other states. There's only 3 states that allow it now. So it's, I think the days are limited, and it'll probably just be limited to private property where we can't really control what people do there. So there's the duck hunting. Some of the other things that we did to try and diversify was the Geelong animal testing facility up there, CSIRO. So it was quite interesting to research that place because they are connected with animal agriculture as well. So they were testing on animals who are exploited for their flesh or their secretions for the industry. So they were trying to protect the industry by confining animals there and testing on them. So they had sheep and pigs, chickens in these kind of like small glass chambers, and they were pumping different diseases into them. So we turned up there. We also did the disruption at the Maya Cosmetics department as well about the testing of animals, but also using animals in their products as well. So I just think it is important, it's a real demonstration of what anti-speciesism is about. And if vegans are up in arms about people thinking that veganism is a diet, well, then that's our fault. We've created that perception. And so we need to try and figure out how we can change that perception. And I think focusing on issues aside from animals who are exploited for food is a way to do that.
Interesting. And so I'm also curious about why veganism isn't something that gets ties directly with direct action. It seems like DXE and particular organisations choose to focus more on speciesism as an actual issue rather than maybe go vegan or do this. Is that an intentional strategy? Is there a reason why you feel like it's more like this is the issue rather than this is what we want you to do?
Yeah, I mean, DXE Melbourne disbanded in mid last year, so I'm not affiliated with a group anymore. So I'm not too sure what DXE's tactics or strategy are. I've got my own views, but they're just my opinions. But I think that is actually something that's really lacking. And it's always important that if you're going to point out an issue, is to provide a solution. And so it is something that needs to be included in press releases, in outreach, in anything that we do, is to share the solution, and that solution is to live vegan. The reason that I like to talk about anti-speciesism as opposed to veganism a lot of the time is because I feel like the word vegan has got negative connotations to it. People associate it with a diet. And so when you talk about being an anti-speciesist or fighting for anti-speciesism or an anti-speciesist world, people take a bit more of an interest. What is that? What does that actually mean? It's a form of discrimination. And so, in light of me being an anti-speciesist, that means that I don't consume animals or anything that comes from them. I don't wear them, use them, etc. And so it's just a different response that you get from people. And I think, it's the way that we need to head. We need to create an anti-speciesist world because that covers off all issues, not just animals who are used for food.
And also, I feel as though a lot of vegans don't realise that they may still be speciesist. And even within myself, I still recognise those behaviours or those biases in some ways. Like we were talking about before the podcast, that you see pigs in certain conditions and you're so used to seeing that from your upbringing that becomes normalized, and you maybe find it harder to maybe empathize with other animals. So yeah, do you feel as though by focusing on that, it in some way gets people thinking more about the underlying thought processes that's going into it? And do you feel like as vegans we need to be careful about our own bias in terms of speciesism?
Oh, absolutely. We are definitely speciesist. I still have speciesist, behaviors as well. And it's just important to recognize them. And we are continually undoing years of, decades of indoctrination, but not just ours, the indoctrination and conditioning of our families. And so you're fighting against the grain a lot. And there's no doubt that if I was to watch a rescue video of a dog, I'd probably shed a tear than if I was to watch a rescue video of a snake, And that's just because I have not personally had experience with them. And, I've spent a lot of time with dogs, but that again doesn't justify harming anybody because I have more of a preference. You're continually learning and growing, but I think it is important that we do recognise that as vegans, we're not perfect and we still will be speciesist in some ways, but it's about learning about it, growing from it, recognising it and rectifying our behaviour where we need to.
I completely agree. And so for anyone that's, interested in getting involved in activism, what would you suggest is kind of an entry point for them into? Because I feel like some people, particularly even myself, when I started becoming active, you can look at it as seeming quite cliquey, or there's certain groups and you're not sure how to go about joining them. What would you suggest in terms of an entry point for them?
I would suggest if you are going to look to join a group or an organisation, I would do your research, understand what their core values are, ask people who have been involved in them what it's like. But I would also encourage people to have a think about what their specific skills, talents and passions are, and how can you bring that to activism. It's not everyone is going to be confident in doing a speak out. Not everyone will be able to take part in a lockdown, and they're not the only forms of activism there are. You know, songs are incredibly powerful. Drawings, pictures are incredibly powerful. One-on-one conversations, hosting screenings, they're all things that you can do to plant seeds with people. And I would just encourage people not to just fit in and do what other people are doing because that's just what's being done. I would encourage people to figure out what they're good at and what they enjoy, because it needs to be enjoyable for you. And it's weird to say enjoyable when you're talking about fighting for animal liberation, but you do need to get a sense of satisfaction and reward from the work that you're doing, or else it will lead to you becoming disengaged and potentially burnout. So
I completely agree. And so also I guess it creates innovation. We get new types of activism that comes about, and there's also a lot of people that probably don't have the time in their week. They're working full time, maybe got kids and things like that, so they can do what they can do from home. And you also mentioned earlier about people that aren't on social media, they're going out there and doing things on a daily basis. Why do you think it's important to, I guess, go into these places and go into these farms and look after these animals? You touched about the individual stories, but why do you think it's so important to have that presence on these farms?
It depends. I mean, if it's about non-published things that are going on, so just rescues.
This is what I mean, like not on social media, like just going there and...
Again, it just comes back to the individual. If you see someone, the challenge is they all need to be saved. They're all, they've all got an impending, execution coming up. And we do typically, when you're out and about, you will help someone who looks like they're in a bit of a difficult situation, more difficult than everyone else. But it's really hard because it is such a big issue, and I think that's why a lot of vegans and activists can feel overwhelmed. But if you can help one individual and you can give them an amazing life and share their story, they have the potential to have a ripple effect across so many different people, like Tilt has, for example. And so I think it's still important that even if people are not splashing it all over social media, that people are out there and they can see what's happening, because a lot of the time outreaches rely on this information to share. You don't necessarily see outreaches in the same spaces going out there and actually rescuing and caring for animals. So we rely on that exchange of knowledge and that information so that people can talk about winter lambing and understand what actually goes on. An outreacher needs to be provided with that information to share it. So I think it is important that we stay in touch with what's happening to other animals, and that we can bring facts to the table and not just, again, regurgitate the same stuff over and over again, which could be inaccurate and therefore harms our credibility.
I completely agree. And also there's a lot of discussions going on around what's the most effective form of activism, and it seems like from what you touched on then that there's so many things that are important that we shouldn't all be focusing on one thing, but more so working together in a different way. Is that would you agree with that? I
do agree, and I think we need to be careful about using the word effective as well, because what does effective mean? Are we measuring
effective at what?
Are we measuring effectiveness? Like, are we setting up KPIs? Are we measuring, like, how do we know? I think we can tell if our actions are having an impact, and they can have a negative impact and they can have a positive impact. And so you judge that based on what you're hearing, not in the echo chamber of veganism, but from the non-vegans around you. And that's probably another point that I'd like to make, is don't isolate yourself and live in a vegan bubble, because it is not the real world. You need to maintain relationships and contact and interactions with people outside of that sphere so that you can actually see what is having an impact, whether it be positive or negative. But we don't know what's effective. And I think it is a combined effort of all different things that are going to help reach people.
And what would you say to people that I guess are, on their, they're still consuming animal products or using animal products, and to them, obviously, activism is like probably a far leap, but they're starting to consider making positive changes. What would you say to someone like that?
What I would say to any non-vegans listening is that it may seem like it's an uncomfortable step to make, or it may, not really resonate with you right now, but I would suggest that if a non-vegan is listening to this, there's something that's piqued their interest to listen to the podcast. And so what I would encourage any non-vegans to do is just start doing your research, have a look at what's actually going on, challenge everything that you've ever been told, and, have a think about the kind of world that you want to create for yourself and for others and your family, because it does affect humans as well, and the impact that some of these industries are having on the planet. And just treat others how you want to be treated. If we can all do that, I think the world would be a much better place.
I agree. Is there anything you'd like to touch on or talk about before we wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for, creating this podcast. And again, it's an important and different way of getting the message out there. Rather than intense media headlines, you're actually giving people a platform to share their stories, learn a bit more. So just good on you.
Oh, very kind of you to say thank you, and thanks for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time while you're in Perth.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
If you'd like to follow Joanne's journey, you can follow her on Instagram at whoisjoanne. You can follow me over at Peaceful Warrior Vegan on Instagram, and Jamie Fezak on Facebook. That's JAIMEFAZACK. Well, if you've got any feedback for the show, feel free to leave a comment on whichever platform you're on. I look forward to sharing more episodes with you in the future, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.